Well, I gave a countdown for the last 5 minutes, so it's fine. Right, I can see audio bouncing.
Bounce.
I can see lots of audio, so you're going to be chorused at the moment. Let's turn off your head.
Excuse me?
Yeah, right. And I think you were coming through on desktop audio as well. So hopefully you can hear me. Hello, everybody, and good evening.
Hello, Gerard. Hello, everybody. Hello, Mikey. Hello, Roderick. Hello, Caboodle.
How is everybody doing this evening? So we had a poll last week to see what we were going to get up to this week in the live stream, because there's so much we can cover in Blender. And I was quite surprised that texturing beat out geometry nodes. It was close, though. I can't remember what the final results were. In fact, I'll go have a quick look now. And Jan's been up to some awesome stuff as well.
Oh, we're talking about my stuff. Cool. You can even show it if you like.
I could do, couldn't I?
Hello, Alien Berry's gaming channel. And in fact, Alien Berry. Not just the gaming channel.
Yeah, I do want to save some of that for next week, though, when we're actually playing games.
Aliana? I might be misreading that. I apologize.
That's fine. These things happen. So just looking up the poll. I hope the poll hasn't changed. Tough. We're doing texturing this week anyway. Yeah, so it was 43% for texturing and 29% for geometry nodes, and then it dropped off from there. So we obviously won't do texturing in 4 weeks' time. We'll do something new on that. But it's looking forward, looking exciting. Yeah, Jan's been busy working on tactics, which we showed a little of last week.
Yes, I've got a lot done this week.
I was going to say, when I say you worked on a little, it's really a lot, isn't it?
I mean, you're welcome to show it if you want. I mean, I've made a couple of changes, so you might have to pull it. But
okay, well, I'll pull it and I'll give a little a little playthrough, and then
this is a Blender time. Like, this is Mikey blendering, but you know, as you've brought it up.
Well, I do like just keeping you guys informed as to what we've been doing.
Todd, thank you, Aliana. Since I pronounced it everywhere I can think of, I'm not sure which one of those was right, but you know, it's definitely one of them.
Definitely. So yeah, I'll quickly launch this and show people what you've been up to, because I think it's absolutely awesome.
I'm a bit proud.
I won't play it through 3 times. I'm doing well this evening, 3 times, because we want to save some of the juice for next week. So I'm just launching the project now.
I'm sure it'll all have changed by next week.
Oh yeah, that is also highly likely.
I've been going forward at quite a clip.
So I'll turn the music off as well, just so I can hear myself, and I'll bring this across. And I've got no easy way of showing it other than doing that. And then, yeah, so you would have seen this as it's been what Jan's been working on. We've got lots of variation here. I'm going to pick the cat one.
He likes the cat one.
That was well timed as well, not planned. Oh, and we get to see this one as well. So there will be some sounds in the game that you guys won't be able to hear at the moment. I haven't got it set up, though. We'll have to play and make sure that's working.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that tail looks awesome from the top.
Doesn't it? So I finished this. Well, I say finished. I started this level today. It's not finished.
No.
But Roybot's going to wake up in a minute.
Nope. Oh, you put the eyeballs in as well.
I did. I told you.
So, yeah, we've got a couple of levels going on here at the moment. And did we have it in night mode last week? I can't remember.
Yes, we did.
Nice.
We have the top down. We have the 3D view. It's coming along nicely. There's a lot of accessories and customization. Unfortunately, from here on in, the easy stuff stops because I've got to spend at least a week getting the difficult stuff sorted out.
Oh, yes. We're looking at making this at least multiplayer of some variety.
Well, it's already local multiplayer, but
yes,
we need on multiplayer. Like at this stage,
I want both of us to be running around and causing each other.
Want 4 people.
Oh, it'd be chaos.
And I've got ideas for new levels and stuff. But yeah, this is battle tactics so far.
They've usually killed themselves off by now. Ooh.
Yeah, it's getting better. I also figured out why they're trapping themselves in the corner with bombs so often. And I think I know how to fix that, but
So I will leave that one now. Bring us back for the moment. There we go. Awesome. So yeah, that's coming along at no end of knots, and it's so much different to play than it was even last week. And as soon as
oh yeah.
we have some multiplayer going, that's going to be a lot of fun. What Jan and I were discussing behind the scenes at the moment is if we can't get that done in the next week, which is a tall order anyway, Jan will pop over. So I don't know how we're going to both squeeze in here, but I'm sure we'll find a way, which will be lots of fun.
So, Mikey, you're going to be doing your Bob Ross impression and taking us through texture
Yeah.
and blendering.
Blendering. Welcome to Blendering with me, Michael.
That's
okay.
Hoppering overing.
Let's hop on over into Blender. Nice. Right. So, as all people know, we should delete the default cube before we do anything else. So when it comes to texturing, I want to really start from some real basics because I think it really helps with just doing anything with texturing in Blender. And the first one is basically, what is a texture? In fact, I can probably be big whilst doing this, but so a texture itself is simply a way of controlling something to do with your material. So if we do something like bring Suzanne into the scene and we give her a material, we've then got a series of controls, and I'll do this in the shading workspace, and let me rejig this around to how I like it. Shader editor. Awesome. So then we've got a bit more of a vertical view on the shader editor. So you'll notice here, by default, we've got the principled BSDF. This is a shader. This is controlling how the surface of an object reacts to light. That's all the material is. And what we can do is we can change something like the color. And you could do that in the principled BSDF. We could make Suzanne any color we want. Let's have a pink Suzanne and make sure that our 3D viewport over here is over in material preview, so we can see that she is in fact pink. Now, when it comes to texturing, instead of having this broad control here where we color in individual faces and have different materials for that, what we can do is we can say for a particular place on our model, color it in a certain way, and we can use a texture to do that control. You may have heard, we don't use them that much these days, but bitmaps, it's literally a map of bits. Which it took me ages when I when I deep dived into textures like 5 years ago. I was like, oh, that's why it's called a bitmap. And you say these things and you don't realize they've called it exactly what it is. So I thought that was really, really useful. So when it comes to texturing, the basic premise is you want to say what on your model is a certain color or a certain roughness or a certain metallicity. It doesn't matter. You'll be controlling these using textures. And because we're going to be doing textures this evening, we'll also be diving into what a UV editor is, what a UV map is, rather. So we have a series of faces, and we've got vertices and edges and all that lot that make up our individual mesh. And in order to unwrap this model, so to make this 3D surface a 2D surface, we flatten it out and we end up with something like this. All of the primitives in Blender come with a UV map by default, which is really useful. So if we were to go and add into our scene a cylinder, if we have a look at the operator panel, you can see it automatically generates UVs, which is really, really useful. It means that when we select it and go into edit mode, we can see that, in fact, this is a really nice one to look at. All of the sides of the cylinder here, you can see it's been mapped out to this lovely straight bit at the very top. And then we've got a circle for the top and a circle for the bottom. I think we might actually use this one to have an idea of how these things end up mapping. But this isn't an image yet. This is just how it would be mapped onto a square surface. And squares seem to be really important when it comes to just texturing in general. And that's because of the way that graphics cards work. We often end up having textures that are of a power of 2. And you don't have to have square ones, but that's pretty standard. So it'll
I
be...
imagine it make it a lot easier given what a UV coordinate actually is.
Yeah.
Because if you've got a U coordinate that's going to have maths applied to it for it to make sense, then...
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that that you can do is show a UV working space. So this it's called U and V because X, Y, and Z was taken up by the 3D realm here, and there is such a thing as a three-dimensional UV map, but they're difficult to see in 2D space, but they do exist. So you can end up with a U, V, and a W map. W being like, imagine a load of slices and you step through them. So that's lots of fun. Yeah, so I think I will do something that Infenzia has popularized recently and go to what's that site called, Jan? Is it Low Spec? To get
for the palette?
Yeah, for the palettes.
Yep, Low Spec. I use it all the time. I use it in pretty much every one of my games, actually.
So I'll just bring this across. Whoop.
If you don't know Low Spec, it's a collection of palettes that you can use for your game. Most of them are geared towards pixel art and retro games, but you can actually use them for all kinds of stuff. And if you're like me and don't really want to mess around too much with color theory, you just want your game to look good, you just find a palette you like.
I mean, it doesn't matter which one we get, but I'm going to go ahead and download this palette here. And I'm going to download it at its smallest size. So it's absolutely tiny. Can I right click on it? This might be the problem with downloading an absolutely tiny...
Oh, just go to Grixel and it has a bunch of different sizes you can do.
Okay, well, I've got it now. So I'm just going to save that down there. It's a tactic. And I'm going to save that in my downloads. I've probably got some other stuff that I've saved into my downloads as well. So here, if we go ahead and go into image and open an image, and we can open up downloads. And what did I just download? I can't see.
Was it called Grixel G?
Yeah, here it is. Grixel. And if we zoom in here, the great thing about this is you can see that it's actually applied this UV map onto this very, very thin 1 pixel wide image. And we've got 1 pixel high, sorry, and then it'll be however many is wide. So sometimes you'll want to rearrange these things outside as well. So in a GIMP or Photoshop or whatever image manipulation program that you want. So what we can do, what we can do here is we can actually select, well, let's turn on material preview so we can see anything that's going on. And you'll notice at the moment that this doesn't have these colors here. So something's going on. It's not mapping at the moment. And we often need to tell Blender you need to use a texture rather than just having this white space here. So if we go ahead and add a new material, and this base color here, instead of it just being a solid color like it was before, we can actually use an image texture, which is what we've got over here on the left-hand side. And now it does ask here, which output do you want to plug into, which is really useful. Confused me at first when they introduced this because I saw image texture or whatever it was that you were trying to use several times. There we go. So we can plug that in. Now you don't have to plug anything into the vector because we're using the UV map that is already on this object. But if you wanted to use a different type of mapping, which we're not going to look at straight away, but if you wanted to, you could plug in something else here and use texture coordinates and have generated, normal, and loads of other ones. I don't think we're going to have the time to do a deep dive on that today. And from this drop down here, I'm going to select the image that we had, and doesn't it look lovely? So it's been spread out across this entire surface. I'm going to give myself a bit more space here. Oh, that's great. You can see here that manipulating that workspace is sometimes challenging. Excellent. So if we go back to the UV editing workspace, we can select a face at the top here. You can see it's mapped at the moment across all of these individual areas. But what we can do instead is we can select those, just like we could the vertices on a mesh, and then we can scale that down to nothing. And then we can actually place it wherever we want on here. You'll notice it's doing a bit of blending between between these, you notice it's getting darker as we go down here rather than being a fixed color. It's kind of blending between all of these different colors. And the reason for that is back over in the shading workspace. If we have a look at how this image is being interpreted, if we go down to here, linear, and switch it, I believe, to closest. Yeah, there we go. No interpolation. Then we get a much cleaner definition between all of these individual colors. Now, as I move it, you'll see it snaps between those various colors, which is actually what you want if you're using a palette like this. And then you can go in and you can select this face here. And in fact, the way that these faces are quite small anyway, you don't have to shrink it down to nothing. But generally what you tend to do is shrink it down to nothing, and then you could just place those individual vertices wherever you like. Or in this case, that'll be a face there. You can color in an object like so. Really, really useful, especially if you've got some basic colors, and this is really, really optimal for doing individual colors across an entire model. In fact, you can bake this type of thing back down at the very end if you needed to. Now, this is all very well and good, but it does give you quite a rigid way of looking at textures. You can only have these colors. And one of the big, big downsides of this is unless these colors all have a specific roughness associated with them, so you'd have another, how wide is this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah, 16. So this is 16 wide. You could also have another grayscale image that's 16 wide by 1 pixel that maps to roughness and maps to metallicity. But if you do that, you are in this position where this green here is locked at being a certain roughness. And just to demonstrate that, because this texture is controlling our entire model, if we decide to make it metallic, the whole model ends up being updated, rather than just an individual area of the model. So you could take another texture and plug it in, but it would need to use either the same map, so it would have to have, where was that face we had? Well, let's do the face on top. Whatever this face was, whether it was incredibly smooth, so not very rough, or incredibly rough, or it's a metallic surface, then whatever you had for your map with metal or roughness would also need to be in this exact position. So you'd need another texture that was exactly the same as this, but in a grayscale, which is quite challenging to do. It's possible to do if you ended up making your own set of these things, but it doesn't give you a lot of control. And that's
I guess you could take each of those pixels and then make an image where you sort of do a what do you call it, a ramp for each one, but that sounds like a really stupid way of working.
You could do a ramp for each one, and for instance, you could have like a light gray here, or a white or a black at the bottom, and vice versa, and a gradient going in between. But you'd still be stuck with the fact that wherever you place this, that face and this color would all have those same properties, which isn't always ideal. And that's one of the reasons why we've opted for, in the action RPG, to actually have a different material for each surface, so that, let's say this top surface here, we can assign a new material to it like so. And then we can say, well, it's a green surface, but it is metallic and it's incredibly shiny, so it reflects the world around it. Mm-hmm. So there's kind of this balance you have to have between like superior optimization and it being quite rigid as to what you could do with it. And creating the black and white map to go along with it. So you've got a green that would be metallic and would be super smooth, and another green that would be not metallic but super smooth, and all the other variations. It starts to get quite difficult. And that's usually where you break away from this really lo-fi aesthetic. Now, when it comes to things like roughness and metallic, you often find if you're doing a very like a mobile game, something that if you start adding on all these extra channels could potentially cause a lot of slowdown, then that's why you just stick to a basic palette like this. But the moment you start wanting to have other properties of your materials, I mean height maps and things like that, those are the sort of things that you're going to have to branch out and probably bake individual maps back down at the very end of it. There's actually a great example here. If I just save this and call this live stream, and we'll come back to that in a second. I've actually been working on... Is it in here? Barrels. Did I call it barrels? Let's just open. I've actually been working on something with the Blender Creative Suite at the moment. Let's go up into here. Give us a second to find it. That's right at the top. Right, barrel. So this is part of what you'll actually be covering in the Blender Creative Suite under the, I think it's basic modeling course. If I go to the shading workspace texture paint, here we go. Okay, so this is where I've already baked things down to an individual map. I do want to show people this, so give us a few moments. Are there any questions at the moment? Yeah?
Nothing yet. But if you guys do have questions, I'm watching the chat and relaxing my feet up and petting the cat, so you just let me know.
Brilliant. So I need to go down to baking color texture. No, before I bake anything. So right there. So I'm manipulating Git Kraken and hoping I don't break a project, but there we go. Yeah, knows that all too well.
Jan special right there.
Yes, 100%. So if I go there...
While he's doing that, we had a great moment the other day when I was trying to make a change and it wasn't working. There's a bunch of bugs. And Mikey said, well, just go back to the previous commit. I went, okay, it's not working. And he looked and went, don't detach the head.
Yes, Jan ended up with a detached head. I don't even know how to fix that.
I don't know what I did. I just went back.
So this is what I wanted to show you guys anyway. So a barrel, and we've got four. There's actually only 3 colors here. So I was just demonstrating at this point. This is exactly what I was talking about earlier. Metallicity, you typically either have something that's metal or it's not metal. I mean, if you want to do something for an artistic impression, sure. But materials can either be dielectric or metallic. That's like physical properties. And this of course, is assuming you're using a PBR workflow, physically based rendering pipeline. And then we
also use the word what was it?
Dielectric.
Okay. And what's that?
Everything that's not metal, I think.
Thank you. I didn't know the word. I know dialectic, but that's no.
I think that's what it is. Correct me in chat if I've mispronounced, if I've misspoken that. So here we have an example of where you would have your different colors and their different roughnesses and whether or not they're metal. And then you could update these individually and change the actual model that you're working on and the colors. But this is a lot of work when you could just do it manually and then optimize your UV map, and we'll get on to talking about UVs in a moment, and instead having a texture that looks like this. I need to zoom out so that hopefully you guys can see that, and then I'll just do one other one. And then one that looks like that for roughness, for instance. So these 2 maps are the same UV coordinates. That's why they look the same. And then you can just apply, you're saying, oh, this part of the model is colored in this way. And this has been done with very little optimization for the UV map. You wouldn't usually end up with large open areas, but wanted to keep things simple overall. Right, let's get back to where we were. So our lovely cylinder here. So mapping individual vertices or faces along here is great. It's a great way of testing things out, but it's very restrictive in what you can do. But the next step on from there actually requires you to actually unwrap your model in some way or another and then texture it from there. So I think a great example of this might be if I do a tiny bit of modeling for a second and model a cube. There we go. That's done. And I'm going to stretch this out slightly on the X or Y axis. It doesn't really matter. And then I'm going to do a Boolean cut between this object and a cylinder. I'm going to rotate that cylinder around on the X-axis. I'm going to scale it up slightly. So you end up like a toy bridge. It's going to be a very simple bridge, not a highly detailed model. Let's add in a Boolean modifier. Oop. Boolean. This one.
I like the word Boolean.
So we've got a lovely like bridge here. I like the word Boolean.
It's just fun.
So we've got ourselves a bridge here. I mean, you could add far more detail if you wanted to, but it doesn't have, or it won't have now, certainly, an intact UV map. Let's go and create a new image. I'll just leave it blank for the moment. And we can see that this is how Blender has decided to map those faces onto 2D space. And you can see there's part of a cube here. Did you ever make like a box at school and you cut out a T-shape, glued the tabs all together and made a cube from it? That's essentially what this has had to begin with, that classic T-shape. And yeah, and then you've got this over here, which should be part of this bit underneath. And then this bit over here, which will be part of the other bit. And I don't know what this individual bit here is going to be. And you can select things and see where they happen to be. It's entirely up to you how you want to approach. It's probably a bit underneath, isn't it? Yeah, it's this bit underneath just here. Nice. So that makes sense, because if we bring everything back by pressing A, you can see this is the bit here. And then you chopped out the middle bit, so it's no longer there. And then we've got the bit at the very end, which is this bit here. Now, I don't like things disappearing like that when I'm working. I prefer to see everything. So I'm going to click on this little button here that says UV sync selection, and then I can see things and see which bits I've got selected. So
I didn't know about that button.
That's a very useful button.
It's a great button. I like that button.
The great thing is, if you turn it off, you can move. We could like select all of this and move it over here. Then when we turn it back on, it's worked. Now, if I had done that now, oh, it's not going to do it now, is it? Let's try and do that again. Because those vertices there are overlapping. Oh well. Obviously, the UV map that was there before, or something's changed. Forget about it. Forget that bit. Adam, edit this bit out when you do it. You know, that happens so often. You touch something in Blender because it does so many different things. I'm sure you have this in Godot as well. And
all the time.
You're like, it never used to be like that. I swear it never used to be like that. And it turns out that something's changed. But going back to this here and thinking about UV unwrapping, if you are wanting to do something like paint on this model, so you're just going to do a bit of texture painting, perhaps make your models look a bit more like World of Warcraft or something along those lines, then you could argue that the UV map and how it is here doesn't really matter. Because what you can do at any point is select all of the object that you want to unwrap, press the U key, and do a smart UV project. And you can play with these items here, and you can play with them afterwards as well. So once you've done it, you might need to open up the operator panel or press F9. And then you can adjust these settings here. And this is a relatively simple model, so it's going to be able to not jerk around everywhere. But usually, if it's not quite right, you'll want to lower this amount down. But don't go too low, because then it starts to get
Roderick suggests that
wobbly.
The problem with the moving things might have been selecting vertices and not faces.
Quite possibly. Let's just have a look. If we select that and move it. Very well. Yes, that's what I was trying to demonstrate just there.
Yep.
Thank you, Roderick. I've got blinkers on at the moment, obviously. So yes, a smart UV unwrap might be all you actually need to do when it comes to unwrapping your models. Here we see that it's laid everything out. It's laid it out in an interesting way. I don't know if it's laid everything out in a perfect way. I mean, we can try and just see what a brick texture looks like if we go and add one. And I've conveniently downloaded a brick texture, I believe. Or did I? I didn't download it.
Lucky.
No, it's not lucky, because I didn't do it.
What are the odds of that, Mikey?
Yeah, quite high. So a couple of places that you could potentially get textures from. Shout out any others in the comments, but just give them their name. If you give the website, it'll probably censor you. That's just the setting.
Yep.
So one place that you can get some textures from is Pixabay, and you can go and pick a brick texture. I'll pick one of these in a moment and download it. Also, one of my favorite places is textures.com. Is there one that's CC0 textures?
Maybe.
There's Texture Haven. Oh, there we go.
Texture Haven is for HDRI, I believe. Is it?
Was that HDRI Haven is the other one I think they do. If they rename themselves anyway, there are plenty of places to get textures from. Textures.com I've used quite a bit in the past.
And there's software you can use to make your own as well. That's worth looking at.
Yeah, you could go out and take a photo. So I'm going to go and grab this brick wall here for the moment.
Diedrich says there's a CC0 texture subreddit as well. That's a useful tip.
Oh, nice. Oh, no, I hate these. Those are bicycles. But do I select the handles, traffic lights? I don't know. That bit. I'm training. Oh, dear. Really? Okay, perhaps I should have signed in. Yes, finally, I'm not a robot. There we go. So that's downloaded. We can go ahead and open that up now. Downloads. I thought I opened that. Brick. Interesting. Did that not download properly?
You'd have to bear with him. It's his first time using a computer.
Yeah, that's interesting. Let me have a look if that's actually working on the computer
I mean, I'm
itself.
giving you hassle for that. Because I'm using Linux, Discord has this really annoying thing where it won't upload from another directory because it doesn't have permission to do so. So I have to
that's
do all
bizarre,
kinds of
isn't
weird
it?
stuff with uploading to a different site or just copying straight from the clipboard.
It's entirely possible that what I've just done there. Let's bring in a little file browser again. There's something that I learned the other day when it comes to images and stuff like that. I don't know, file browser. There we go. So let's go to downloads. Date modified. There we go. Today, brick. Can I just... There we go. Hey, that worked. Okay. So we have a brick texture applied. Excellent. And it's just not showing in here for some reason. There we go. Now you can see here it's stretched. This is what I was going to wonder about once it had been UV unwrapped. You have a look at this. It's changed the direction depending on where it is. So this isn't great, and I would advise getting yourself a seamless texture. So as it wraps around one end, it starts again perfectly. This one might do it, it might not. We might end up with a nasty seam in our model, which is actually one of the points of using a seamless model. We might be able to get away with spreading it out amongst this particular model that we've got here.
I was going to say this one might be seamless, but I don't think it is, looking at it.
It could be. I mean, we'll find out.
Maybe, actually.
We'll find out as we go. So one of the issues that I've got with how this has been put together is because this isn't a square image, everything is squashed, which means that things will be squashed in reality as well, like here, squashed or stretched. So here, because the archway is this way round, and this one is this way round, not only are the textures going to be applied differently, but they're going to be squashed or stretched unevenly. They're not going to have a one-to-one aspect ratio with whatever we've got here. Another way of unwrapping a model, and for something like this, is you really have to unwrap it manually and then move things around and adjust accordingly. And there's something, if you have a look at models that you can potentially buy, one of the things that one of the properties of it is whether or not it has non-overlapping UVs.
Yeah.
Now, having overlapping UVs is actually a really sensible way of working. So if we take, for example, this bit here and this bit over here, they're actually the same, want of a better description. So it would make sense if over here on the UV editing workspace that we mirrored these or joined them together so that the same texture overlapped on both sides. But what it means is that if you were to go and take that outside of Blender and try and do something with it, like lighting or adding something extra onto the texture, it ends up being put on both sides. In fact, we came
across lighting would be a real problem.
Yeah, baked lighting would it'd end up baking it on both sides, unless you had a separate UV map for that. So you can in Blender have multiple UV maps. There's absolutely no reason why you have to have just the one. However, if you're working outside of Blender as well, typically game engines tend to have a UV map for the base texture, and that would apply to roughness and metallic mapping as well. And then they often have another UV map, and that other UV map could be used for a dirt map, so putting grime onto a model, sort of overlaying textures on top of one another. It's also often used as a light map, so the game engine itself will use that to bake lighting information, which can be incredibly useful.
So Godot has UV1 and UV2 that you can set or leave.
Yeah.
And UV2 by default is what you'd use to create a light map if you're baking on an engine. But you can use it for other channels if you'd rather.
Yes. But it's worthwhile noting, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but my experience tells me unless you're doing something incredibly custom, most game engines are only set up for having 2 UV channels, which makes sense. We've talked about it in the past when it comes to draw calls. Each UV map is going to be an extra draw call, even if it's not going to be used. If it's on the material, it's going to be used.
For pretty much any use case I could think of using for anything I would make, 2 UV channels is probably fine. Because if I'm going more than that, there's something wrong with my design. I could imagine that someone who knows what they're doing way more than I could wants to use way more UV maps to do something even fancier. But if you're that involved and you're using Godot, fork the engine.
Pardon?
And give yourself more. You fork the engine and give yourself more UV channels.
Oh yeah. That would be a great way of doing it, but obviously that requires a lot of.
You'd have
some coding.
It's an open source engine, so you can. But if you're not somebody who is comfortable going into the source code of a game engine and changing it, you probably don't need more than 2 UV channels.
Yeah, exactly. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do best practice, and I'm going to search for a texture. Now I'm going to search for bricks here, and actually download a proper brick texture. And this is a great place actually to just. I'm going to use rough bricks, these ones here, because these are going to be seamless and they're going to be square, which is kind of important. But the other thing that I wanted to show you all here is that we have different types of mapping. So this is an albedo or a diffuse texture, and that's just basically what the color of a surface is without any lighting information. That's the important thing. It's got no lighting information at all. Displacement is a texture. It's another map. It's another image that shows how high or low a particular surface is, black being the lowest and white being the highest. Now, I want to also draw your attention to the fact that the albedo is 8-bit, so there's going to be 256 individual steps of color. Often things like displacement, and in this case, normal map, are both 16-bit. And if we do 2 to the 16 instead of 2 to the 8, we have 65,536 steps. So you get a lot finer control. And that's, excuse me, that's really important, because when it comes to something like a brick wall, if you don't have that level of detail, you can, and use a displacement map, you can actually see little steps where those 256 actual steps happen to be. And we can see here we've got a roughness map and an ambient occlusion map as well. All really useful. I'm just going to take the albedo for the moment. And yeah, why not have the 1024? All powers of 2, except that big one there at the bottom. And it's a TIFF. Okay. Let's go back over into Blender, and I'm going to load up that other image that I've just downloaded. So yes, clicking and dragging from here to there, I completely forgot it was a thing you could do. That texture looks a bit better to work with. Awesome. Right, let's go back to the UV editing workspace here and switch this over to the texture we've just got. And look at that, because it's square, the UV map has mapped itself to this really well, which is a great start. So at this point, what we probably want to avoid is any mirroring of UVs, so putting UVs on top of one another. We'll keep them all separate. And another thing to bear in mind is if you were working on this particular model and it was mirrored, it would automatically have mirrored UVs. That's something that later on down the line, I don't think I've got it turned on at the moment. Bear with me while I turn on mirror tools. I could have looked. No. So to really show the point here, under edit, isn't it? Auto mirror, and we're reflecting on the y-axis. There we go. So this is now cut right down the middle. If we have a look at it, go into edit mode. It's solid shaded for a moment. So one half of our model, and then we can adjust it and it'll be mirrored around the other side. If you construct your models like this, and I highly suggest people do construct their models when they have symmetry by using a mirror modifier, so you don't have to model both sides. I mean, that's a real waste of your time. But when it comes to UV unwrapping and texturing, the whole process of UV unwrapping, which is almost necessary when you're texturing almost every time, it needs to be done after applying your modifier if you don't want to have overlapping UVs. Or say you were going to bring this into the game and you were going to paint on your texture and do a bit of graffiti, it would appear back to front over here. So if I was to write Mikey was ear, well, on this side, it'll be completely back to front and illegible. And
this is a problem we ran into when you were making models and I was playing with Substance Painter, which is a program I really enjoy using. I bought the Steam version because I can't be bothered with this paying for a service constantly. And Mikey made these incredible ships, and he made these quite performant UV maps, and I brought them into Substance Painter, and I couldn't use them because I wanted to put like company logos on them, and they were reversing.
Yeah, it wasn't fun at all. Let me just apply that mirror modifier, and we'll just keep things separate for the moment. So let's go ahead, select all of the model, and unwrap it by just pressing U and clicking on unwrap. And we can see we've actually got an error at the bottom. I've not seen an error like this before. It's basically complaining by the looks of it. Let's bring it back up again. Unwrap. Failed to solve one of one items. Edge seams may need to be added. It doesn't know what to do here. So what you can do, I'll just go full screen on this at the moment, is we can use edge select. I'm going to get rid of that middle one as well. So I'm going to dissolve those edges. So we can go around our model and select where we want to cut out so we can project it. So for instance, this edge running around here, around this side and this side, I probably will want these individual faces separate from one another. So we can go ahead, Control and E, or it's under the edge menu. And then we can add or mark a seam. And when we do that, you get this red highlight on those seams. So now these two pieces will be cut out individually if we were to go ahead and unwrap. And the rest of it will probably end up a mess because ideally you'd want another seam. Where would you cut this in real life if you were making a cardboard model of it? Let's just see what Blender interprets from this. Unwrap. Yeah, here we go. So it's done these two. Okay, it's rotated them. We can sort that out. But this one here is a real mess. It's tried to make it a contiguous chain, and that's no good. So what we can do instead is put a slice in somewhere, perhaps on this edge. When you're slicing your model up like this, you really want to pick places that no one's going to see. Because it's likely, unless you're spending a lot of time and detailed manipulation, that this particular edge here will be invisible. Let's say you're exporting this into a game. You're unlikely to look at the bottom part of a mesh. Although if we were talking about optimizing it for a game, you could even question whether this face and this face would ever be seen if it was put into the ground. I'm not going to risk
I mean,
that at the moment.
if you're doing a physics-based game where you want things to be knocked around, then you need this to look good from all angles.
Yes. But so in that case, you pick somewhere that's least likely to be seen, and a corner. In fact, corners like this are always a great place to put seams. And you could put seams on all of these corners. And I could see an argument here for this top bit. Well, you might want to map it differently. You might not even want a brick texture on it. And then this edge here and this edge here, you probably want to map differently. So you separate those out. And then this bit underneath, I'd probably keep that as a continuous space.
Yep.
Unless it was necessary. So with all of those selected, I'm going to go Control and E again and mark seams. I'm going to press, well, I'm not going to press U. I'm going to select all first because we need to say to Blender, unwrap all of this, please. And there we go. So I can see straight away here that these two bits are definitely the bottom bits. But the question is, are all of these in proportion to one another? I hope they are. And by that, I mean, if I grab this individual face here on the UV map and rotate it 90 degrees and put it in line with this slot, does it match? And yes, it does. This is actually something I've come across plenty of times where one edge is not mapped correctly in terms of its proportions to something else, which means when it actually comes to the texturing, it will look different. And this will actually lead me nicely onto something I do want to talk about today, and that's the in chat, who's heard and understand what a texel is? So what is a texel? That's your quiz for the moment while I'm carrying on here.
I wrote me, I know.
Awesome. So this is actually a great...
Although I had to look it up because you just dropped it in conversation. Brian says, I have not. Melicon says, raise his hand.
So I'll give people a few more seconds while I'm talking about here. So one of the things about this individual map here is it...
Diedrich says, it's an island in the Netherlands, in Friesland. Top marks, well done. Texel is an island. Yep, we're all moving there.
Let's go. So we were talking about proportions and checking that this bottom bit here, even though it's gone a funny direction, that it matches up with the width of all of this lot. But what nothing matches up with is this side here. So this set and this set, they don't look like that. So it's going to look squashed on those edges, and everything else will probably look pretty fine in terms of its proportions. So let's go ahead and turn on material preview. Not only is it the wrong way, but you can see all the bricks are like half size, even if they're not the same proportion as everything else. However, this edge here, and I think the top actually, yeah, the top falls into the same category. And then we've got this side here, but this bit and this bit look good in terms of their density. This here looks okay. And the bottom bits, again, I would probably remap them just to be a small area.
So, Mikey, I'd like to give you my rough and ready kind of definition of a texel, and you tell me how far off I am.
Fire away.
I would say a texel is what's the word I'm looking for? A mental construct, a way of figuring out the amount of texture information per pixel.
Not far from it. It's what
I've
you
got
could. Yeah, it's what you can use texels for. Yeah.
So I always picture it as I've got this UV image and I've got my UV unwrapping. UV being the two-dimensional part of the texture. So you've got UV and then X, Y, and Z, which is a three-dimensional thing. So where on this texture does the model go and vice versa? How much fidelity do I have on this face?
So
that's what I always think of as a texel.
Yes. So that's kind of what you'd end up using texel density for. And texel density is a great way of making sure you're not using a 4K texture. Well, let's take this here. This is a 1K texture, and my screen is at roughly 2K because it's 1080p. So on a 1080p monitor, if this is taking up half the screen, is the resolution of the image clear enough? if we're looking at this bridge and it's a background image over there, and you've gone and used an 8K texture for it, so we've got this over here, and that area there is only let's say 1024 by 1024, part of a 4K screen. I don't know what it actually work out to be. Probably not. It's probably a lot smaller. Then you've just wasted a ton of stuff, because the texel density of that is tiny at the moment. Absolutely
you
tiny.
can also go the other direction, right? This is something you see indie devs and 3D artists make mistakes a lot with when they're first starting. You're making a giant mech, for example, and you want a really nice steel texture, and you find this steel texture, but it's quite small, and you just apply it, and there's just nowhere near enough texel density for that image to look good.
Okay, so if you're in a game, or even in Blender, it doesn't really matter, and you were texturing this bridge from this side, that side of the model, and bearing in mind, yes, I'm using paint here, but look, it's 68 pixels by 44.
That's
so
pixel art.
It is pixel art. It just goes to demonstrate that if I was using even a 1K, a 512, no, even a 256, 128, so a 64 by 64 would start to show some artifacting, but a 128 by 128 would be fine to texture this bridge with, because it's that far in the background.
Brian says +1 for paint.
Yep. I mean, it's come on a long way. I'm quite impressed with Microsoft and their free tools now. But yeah, so texel density is making sure that the actual area that your texture's actually using up on screen is proportional to what the texture is that you're using. If your bridge is here and you're walking past it, it's going to be blurry. It's going to be real, as it is here. You know, it's starting to get blurry. It's not very well defined. There are a couple of ways that you could solve that. You could do the brickwork procedurally. You could scale this area up. Let's find an area that we want. We could scale this up so we've got more of the texture being represented. And this would now be an absolutely massive bridge. So there are ways in which you can approach this. And you can see on this particular image, it's going to be difficult to have a UV layout where we stretch something out like this and also not have overlapping UVs. So that would be the challenge on this particular area. In fact, with this, what I'd probably do is map it and then bake it to a brand new texture of the right size. But what we have at the top here, hey, look at that. Let's get rid of that annotation. Can I remember what it is? Yeah, right click. There we go. Whoop. Yeah, if you ever want to draw on your models, hi. You can just hold down the D key, as you can see, and you can write, or you can rub out with the left and right mouse buttons respectively. And if you want to change the color of that for whatever reason, you can go to your properties panel here, go to the view, scroll down to annotations, and you can have multiple layers of annotations if you wanted to, so you can turn those on and off. You can change their opacity so it's not so bold on the screen, but also you can come in and change the color.
For some reason, watching you do annotations has reminded me trolling my students when I was an adjunct in the US, where I would come into a new classroom and write on the whiteboard with a Sharpie. I just watch them freak out before I taught them my trick for how to remove Sharpie from the whiteboard. But it was just that moment just made me feel very happy.
Nice. Right, so we've got a proportion issue going on here with this top face and these two sides. Now, fortunately, I've made everything in a manner that will allow me to just not guess it, but actually do it accurately. When I scaled this out, and if we have a look at it in object mode with the item here, we can see that it's a unit size, and there's a good reason for having things a unit size. And there's so many ands going on here. You know, this is not in proportion.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know why it's not in proportion when I unwrapped it?
Because you unwrapped it on a no.
Okay. So one of the things that I always emphasize that people do is that they edit their objects in edit mode. Because this lengthways here of our objects is on the x-axis, and then we've got a scaling factor of 2 on the x-axis. So the object it actually looks like this, And what does our UV map look like? It looks like that. So if we come back out and apply our scale, so 2, and apply that with Control and A and just apply the scale. If we go ahead and unwrap this now, the UV map will actually look like it's supposed to in terms of its proportions. Yeah. It's amazing the number of things that not applying your scale or not applying transforms can actually cause issues with. Now, later...
Every single time we've used an asset and if we want to do it's caused issues. Whether it's with physics or texturing or positioning.
Yeah.
Or grid maps. Incidentally, we are coming up to the hour. So if you guys have questions, thoughts, concerns, suggestions for Mikey, song requests.
Has it been an hour already? Wow. I don't feel like stopping just at the moment. I want to finish off this little object.
Getting the questions in.
So I'm going to start working on this now and bringing it to some sort of conclusion. The first thing before I do anything else is I want a sort of uniform scale of the bricks. So I'm going to grab this area here and just keep on scaling it up until those bricks are of a size that I think is good. And I think that's a good... Maybe I've gone a little far there. Bring that back down. Okay, I think that sort of scale there works quite well. And looking at the alignment of the top and bottom of the bricks, that looks okay to me. I wouldn't want to spend too long at this point if this was a basic asset that I was putting together to try and work out whether or not that is good. I'd hand it over to Jan and go, hey, does this work? And he'll go, no, I want a different... I wanted a suspended bridge. And by the way, so we were trying to fit everything on the image here. The UV space is quite large. We could dump those over there if we wanted to. Because this texture in the background is repeated everywhere, which is really useful. So we can make sure that our UVs still aren't overlapping.
Is there a way to see it repeating in this view?
Yes. So under our properties panel here, I'm saying this with such confidence, repeat image. There we go. So under the view tab of the properties side panel, repeat image. And yes, you're quite right. You'll want to turn that on. If you were shoving something somewhere else, you'd probably want to turn it on so you could align your mesh details with the image underneath. I'm going to turn that off for the moment because that gives me a real headache. But yeah,
there's times you want it and there's times you don't.
Exactly. And being able to turn those things on and off. So let's take this top bit here. I don't want it to have a brick texture, really. But to be honest, if it was, I would want them going the other way, 90 degrees to what they are at the moment. So with that selected, I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees. That looks good to me. By the way, I could come in here and say I wanted it a single color, perhaps this area here. I could scale it to nothing and just put it over that area there. Bearing in mind, if you scale by nothing, you can never unscale that. But what you can do is select that individual face and press U again and unwrap. And then work on it from there. But because I've done that, it no longer matches the scale of what we had before. So if I rotate that by 90 and align it with this, you can see it's what, 2/3 of the way? We'd actually need to make this larger to fit exactly the same area that this front takes up. So I'm just going to undo those changes there. That's going to be the easiest thing for me to do. I'm going to move that out the way over there for the moment. These two areas here also need to be rotated around. That's fine, but if I rotate it by 90, but they're upside down on the image. And that might be the way that you've had to manipulate your UV workspace to fit on a specific image, but it doesn't feel right to me. So I'm going to rotate it by -90 instead. So it kind of matches what's going on otherwise. And now we've got all of the brickwork at the same scale because we unwrapped it all together and we scaled it all together. And of course, this is just with one texture. If you were working with multiple textures, because there's no reason why this top bit has to be mapped to brick or the sides, then you could go ahead and change those accordingly. But now comes I suppose, the fun part. And some people really do enjoy UV unwrapping. For most people, it's a real pain. But there is kind of a joy in aligning things. So, for instance, coming to this edge here, this brickwork doesn't work for me at all. And there are a couple of things that you can do to really help with your aligning. So let's select this face. It's this one here. And we're trying to join it onto this one here. So why not select it and put it so it aligns? In fact, we can turn on snapping and turn on vertex. And hopefully that'll be able to snap right there. And look at that. It looks like those bricks just flow round. But it probably doesn't align this side. So you come back in. You can see where this is going, though, and then you move that up and you snap it on top of there. Yes, we've got UV overlapping there, so I'm going to move that out of the way. You come to this side, and it doesn't quite align. So you come in and you snap it. I'm not going to be able to move that to quite the right place. There we go. You snap it there. So now you've got... this area here isn't actually aligned, which suggests that it's probably flipped 180. So if I rotate that 180, yep, that looks much better. So from this angle, that looks really nice. From this angle, looks really nice. This corner's going to probably be the problem. Actually, it doesn't look too bad. You can see it's slightly misaligned. Hey, that looks pretty good. And that is an accident. Hey, I've got the saying in.
He's got the Bob Ross in.
Hey, it's a happy accident. Yes, exactly. So yeah, you can if you zoom in here and start pixel peeping, you can see that these are different bricks. They're no longer aligning. And there's no way of really getting that and that to align at this point. Not without scaling and making the brickwork match exactly. But this is a really low poly model, and if you were having a look at this and pixel peeping, in a game, you probably wouldn't have it like this. You'd have maybe some other stuff.
Some borders and some
objects
in the way.
Vegetation, a sign, something like that. And this model would be likely, unless it was a background object, in which case everything we've talked about is null and void anyway. So, yeah. I think that would be absolutely fine at that point. What these under ones look like, again, I would probably stop at this point. And the way that they match up going round, that's going to be incredibly hard to do anyway. Although for the majority of it, they're pretty well aligned. They get a bit... Obviously, they get a bit... they get worse the higher it goes because of the way the bricks are. So you could come in, and what you'd have to do here is, say for this area at the top, you'd have to come in and you'd have to change this. You'd have to scale it vertically and make it narrower as it went up so that it spread out more of the brick. And that's not something that I'm going to do right now, because that'd be really boring. And this is where kind of the pain comes in, but also part of the joy, because if you see UV unwrapping like a puzzle, and you like puzzles, then you can start to enjoy the process. So there's... is there any questions on what I've gone over so far? There is one final thing that I want to do, and that's actually bake this to a new texture so that you can then use this uniquely. It's obviously quite optimal at the moment, but I feel like it'd be far, far better if it's baked down to its own texture. So if anybody's got any questions at the moment, either what I've gone on so far or even something completely different to do with Blender, that's absolutely fine.
Just completely different, if you're bored.
So
we might not answer them, but...
Haha. So if we want to bake this, and whether or not this has got other textures, like a road on top of it, shall I do that real quick? Yeah, let's put another texture on it, and maybe a donk on it as well. So I'm going to have a look on here for, just sneak that in. Road. So I want one with, proper lines on it. New road, something like that. Patched road. I'm surprised. Road, railway. No, I want a texture that works for it. Hey, this is good. So one with a path. I tell you what, you can spend quite a bit of time searching for roads. That looks like it's got a bit on the side. Let's use that. Download that. JPEG, seamless. Oh, there's loads of other ones, but we do want the seamless, so if we need to repeat it, we can do. And let's bring another texture in. And in fact, at this point, it'll need to be a new material, and then we can bake that down to a new texture. So I'm going to select my object and go into edit mode with that top face, and only that top face selected. I'm going to add in a new material.
So while you're doing that, Roderick says, what about a reverse process? Unwrap a model, export the UV coordinates, and then make a texture to fit it perfectly. Oof, that sounds like a hassle. And Diedrich says, I don't know how much time it would take to explain, but how would you use multiple textures, say, for the top side? He's never really used Blender. He's here for the programming. Me too. I mean, I have used Blender.
Well, it's that question is what I'm doing right now. So new material for the top, because the texture that we're going to use to control the color, there are other ways of doing it, but this is the least painful one. I'm going to search for image here and plug in color. And what was the reverse process? Unwrap a model, export the UV coordinates, and then make a texture to fit them perfectly. Yes, you can do that. That's called hand painted texture. Thanks, Melicon. You took the words literally out of my mouth as I was saying it.
He took them literally out of your mouth.
Yes. That's beautiful. Thank you. So here we've got our road. I've just put it in straight away. I'm going to assign that material. And you can see here, we've got a material for the sides and a material for the road on top. That's really poorly mapped. So we go into UV editing workspace. You'll notice here that this is what I was hinting at earlier when we were talking about the individual pixels, that the UV map is consistent no matter what the texture is. So if you're using a texture to map a different parameter, like its roughness, etc., it needs to be in the same place. It needs to have the same color information. But anyway, back to this road here. That's in the wrong place, and we can help ourselves here by switching the texture across. And at this point, I'm going to turn off that mapping that we had earlier so that I can place things better. I'm going to rotate this around by 90 degrees. And I'm going to move it towards here. And then I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to scale it until we have a path on either side. Something like that. That doesn't look quite right, but you know what? It'll do. It'll do for what our purposes are here. So now we've got a unique texture on the top, and we've got our brick bridge. And from a distance, you know, that's absolutely fine. You might want to, at this point, and I'm not going to go into massive detail, but if it was joined on with another one to the side of it, would it map together seamlessly? No, not quite. You can see here. In fact, that might be the dodgy side anyway. That's a nasty seam there. That would be seen. It's a seam that would be seen. In fact, both of them would. So that's something you might want to consider if you were making something that tiled across like this. Or what you could do is rotate it by 180.
Rotated it.
No. It doesn't work in this case. But anyway, back to this and baking down that individual texture. Right. First of all, the thing that we need to do is have somewhere to bake to. So we're going to have to create a new texture within Blender that we can do that with. And I'm going to do that in the shader editor. No, let's stay over here because there's an image new. Here we go. Name. I'm going to call it bridge. And I'm going to call it the color because that's all I'm baking at the moment. You can bake other maps as well if necessary. Width and height. I'm still going to stay with 124 by 124. And then we can have a side-by-side comparison to see whether or not that's too high, too low. I wouldn't want to go much lower than that anyway with this type of asset, but it might work because we've got quite a bit of area here that's just brickwork. So, let's bring that up again. So, bridge, color. Do I want an alpha channel? I'm going to untick that because if you have an alpha channel, so you've got red, green, blue, and alpha, that's 4 channels instead of 3. So good maths. But it basically means that the size of your texture is going to be larger for no real reason. And I believe the alpha channel is the one that cannot be compressed as well, which means that if you add alpha, it's definitely going to be at least 25% larger than it needs to be. And I'm happy with that. So I'm going to click OK, and we've got this blank texture ready to bake to. If we go over to the shading workspace, this is really important. So we've got 2 materials on this object, and we want to bake those 2 materials down to our 1 texture. Now, at the top of your at the top of your shader workspace, there's the slots, material 3 and road. That should really be called brick. And there's also this drop down here. Don't get confused between the 2. Otherwise, you'll start swapping materials out. But these are the 2 that we want to focus on. We've got material 003 and road. Now, what we want is our new texture that we're going to bake to exist on both of those materials. So I'm going to go ahead, bridge color, select it. I'm going to copy that because I'm lazy and go to material 1 and paste that in. And we're just going to do a couple of checks here. Bridge color, exact. It needs to be selected. If it's not selected, and this one was when we bake, guess where our bake's going to go? It's going to go right on top of that one and ruin our texture. So we want to make sure that this one is selected. And again, I'm going to go back here. This one is selected. We don't need to change anything here, but if you were baking a metallic or a roughness or anything else that's not color information, so pretty much everything else including normals, you want the color space to be something else, ideally non-color. Otherwise, you're going to be baking in biases of how computers display color rather than its actual color. But in this case, sRGB is absolutely fine because we're dealing with the actual surface color of our object. Okay, so we've got ourselves, I'm going to change this one here to the image so we can see what's going on. Image editor, there we go. And I'm going to load the image into it. So to reiterate, we've got somewhere to bake to, and we've got our texture, our texture loaded into the shader editor, into both of the materials that we've got. If you were baking 6 materials, you'd have to have this in all 6 of them. And then making sure that it is selected. That's really important. And then finally, we need to bake. So we go to our render properties, and we go from EV to cycles. I'm going to switch to GPU compute. Some people have problems with GPU compute, in which case you'll want to switch this over to CPU. And then we're going to scroll all the way down to the bake setting. When we're down in the bake setting, we've got a series of options. I'm going to make this area a little wider for a moment. The bake type is important. And if we switch that out, we can see we've got an option for diffuse. And the diffuse is the same as albedo. It's the surface color of your material. But there is something else we need to change here. Notice underneath, we've got this influence, and we've got direct and indirect. We don't want any lighting information, so we're going to remove that from here. We only want the color information. And then, all being well, if we go ahead, and I don't think it is all well at the moment, and we'll see why in a moment. If I go ahead and bake, will it appear on our texture? It does, but it only appears like this. So this is where we have a tiny issue. And that is that our UV unwrap for our model is very large. Notice here, if I select everything, it's much larger than the image. So we have, in fact, baked what we asked Blender to do, but it looks like this. So only this area has appeared on our image. And you'll be like, this is really annoying. But there is a way around this. If you remember earlier, Blender can have multiple UV layers. So at the moment, we're using UV layer 1 or 0, depends how you want to count it. And we can have a look at those in the object data properties. Go down to UV maps here. We can see we've got a UV map. And that is what's mapping our model here to our image. If instead we create a new map, I'm going to rename it straight away to bake, so we're not going to get confused. And we switch over to it and unwrap our model. It's important that it is selected. I hope this goes well. We're going to unwrap again, and we're just going to click unwrap, and it's going to put everything within the bounds of our image. Now, if we go over to our text, so our shading workspace, we've got a couple of things that we need to set up. This vector here earlier that I said we don't need to worry about because we're only using one, we now need to worry about it. So we're going to use the texture coordinate, I believe. Yes. And we're going to, you know what would be easier here? I'm going to just bring in UV map. It's going to be a lot easier to work with and a lot easier to understand. So UV map, and we're going to pick the UV map. So that's how the road is being mapped. And we can see it's updated there accordingly. This one, our bridge color. Yes, Jan?
We have a conversation about hand-painted textures. Roderick's saying, I guess it'd be a real pain to return to update it when you can slightly change the model, like a few more faces. So you don't want to do it before the truly final model. Is that right?
Yes, that's 100% right. This is why in the pipeline, if you imagine you're working in a team, even if it's just a team of one, when you finished your modeling, it in a very big team, you might pass it on to someone who will UV unwrap it, and then someone who will texture it, and then someone who will rig it, and rigging can be done in line with texturing, and someone who will animate it if it's an animated model. And that's really important because the moment you add stuff in, there's not somewhere you can put that new UV slice, you're going to be re-unwrapping it. Now, you don't have to unwrap everything. If you recall earlier, I selected just the top of the model and unwrapped that individual part. But that's not true if you've opted for the smart UV. If you're going to do that, it's going to do it to the entire model. And it will recalculate it based upon the geometry that you have there, which means that it's going to be completely different. It might be subtly different, but it will be different. And usually it's completely different. And that means you're going to have to retexture your model. So it is really important that you work from a point that will be, that will be like the final model moving forward. Also, keep a backup. So literally have a version increment if you're going to add stuff to it, so that if you decide it wasn't worthwhile, you don't have to redo your work.
There's nothing quite like completely wrecking a model's UV and not being able to go back to it.
I mean, as you can see here, this is a very simple object, and I know I've been talking through it with you, but literally the only difference between what I would have probably done if I wasn't explaining as I was going along is I'd have spent some more time aligning stuff. I'd have given myself 40 minutes to unwrap this model. But then if I had to do it again because I did something silly, and believe me, as a beginner, you're going to do something like that going forward, or even a professional. But anyway, if we have a look back at our model for the moment, you can see because we currently have, with it selected, UV maps, because we have this one selected, look at how it's changed our underlying model here. And at the moment, we've only remapped the top here. So we've taken our road texture and we've said use the original UV map. And this bridge color, we need to use the baking map. Now we go from slot 2 to slot 1. And here, again, we bring in a UV map. And you can see I'm repeating myself a little here. But that's okay. It's just reiterating the point. We're going to use the UV map. You can see the model has changed back to where we want it to be. Let's do the same here to this. Bring in a UV map. And I could have copied at this point from one to another, from slot 2 to slot 1, because they're identical. We could have grouped these together. And then we can use the bake map. Now, famous last words, I know. Let's switch the image out here to the bridge color. Make sure that the bridge color is selected. Now, if you're just like going through the motions, it's very easy at this point to forget that you're supposed to have both of these selected and you end up baking to the wrong place. That's quite bad, by the way, because you may destroy data that you didn't want to destroy if you hadn't realized. Okay, now if we go back here, scroll down. So we've gone to our render property, scroll down. fingers crossed. I think I've got everything done, and we click bake. It may take a little longer, but there we go. It's baked out that texture it's baked out the texture to our own texture, which is awesome.
Ta-da!
Ta-da! Final thing, we need to save it. Do this, by the way. Do make sure you save it at this point, because if you go off and come back, this will be black again, which is really annoying.
Feels so annoyed.
Yeah, so I'm going to save that. Just going to bridge color, whatever. That's now saved. So if I do lose it or I muck it up, we can get back to it. Right. So the final thing here, you can see there's a bit of bleeding here between textures. I'm not going to worry about it for the moment. We could tighten up this size down here. In fact, I will just do that for a moment. Let's go down to 2 pixels, and then the spread shouldn't be too wide around there, and it should be relatively precise. I'm gonna not that, this one here, save. Now finally, I'm going to create a third material so I don't ruin anything I've done, and I'm going to call that material bridge. It's a new material. I'm going to call it bridge. We're going to use this texture that we've got here, so I'm going to drag it in. I'm going to, with my model selected, select everything and assign that material. So it just goes white. And then finally, drum roll, plug this into this. There we go. It's textured. It has its own texture, and it's all mapped together. Thank you very much. I'm so glad that worked. I had a moment there when I was like switching UV maps. I'm like, don't muck around with me, Blender. So yeah, that's worked absolutely fine. Now, at this point, you mentioned texture painting. We could do that. There's absolutely no reason why we can't switch over to texture paint mode, and no one's going to see this. And I'm pretty sure this has happened in the past, where you get these hidden areas and levels. And you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to risk it. I'm going to move everything out of the way on my monitor down here, so you'll probably just see the top of my head in a second. But now I could just go, Mikey was here. And that's now on our model. And yeah, I'm glad I actually did it on the actual model instead of here. But there you go. This is now in the realm of hand painting. So you could actually do something like this and then hand paint over it, essentially using this as a template to what you wanted to do.
And of course, if you generated height maps and so forth, then it would look like it was spray painted onto the bricks.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can follow the contours.
Yeah, 100%. So there we go. We could have actually set that as a, if you wanted to, you could have set that as a separate texture and then overlaid it on this specific spot.
A decal.
Almost like a decal, yeah. But
however, we won't go into decals because we're already at the 80-minute mark.
That's so much fun.
Well done, Mikey. Has anyone got any questions before we wrap this up?
Let's bring you back into the fray.
Ooh.
Dun, 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 dun. Right button.
Yes,
what was that? Are you dressed, Jan? Are you ready?
Sorry, I was just reading a book there. No, it's good work, mate.
So yeah, hand painting textures, absolutely fine. You can also use already done textures, so you can when you're painting, you can paint with a texture. So you can go and grab a brick texture and paint with that if you wanted to.
I mean, that's one of the things I love doing in Substance Painter.
Yeah, using a texture to be able to do that, and of course you could put cracks. You can actually paint, essentially paint normal maps. So I've done that quite a bit when playing around in Blender. I mean, for instance, here. Okay, while we're waiting for any final questions to come in, I'm just switch back over. There's one technique that Ian Hubert has done, and providing we don't actually change much, we can add additional geometry to our model, and it will add it to our UV map. So, for instance, if we go into edit mode and add a loop cut in and bring it roughly to where that path is. Should have just made it bigger to begin with. Let's edge slide that to there. And then we add another loop cut in and we bring it this way. And I'm only doing it approximate. Now, if we grab this face and extrude it inwards, and I want to use Alt and E and use extrude manifold. Oh, I've got the circle select tool. I hate that tool. I hate it.
Yeah.
Right, let's try. Probably ended up extruding by nothing there, which should cause us additional problems. But anyway, if we grab that and extrude manifold, we should be able to bring it down. And notice how it's squashing the texture underneath. Now, is there an option here to correct? Yeah, I think that's... So there's an option here called correct face something, face attributes. I think that's what I need to have before I turned on, before I did that extrusion. And then I believe, look at that, it keeps the UV. So the only thing here that will be absolutely horrible would be these edges here. As we can see, they're stretched down. So you would have to go in and UV unwrap and position this.
Because it's now additional geometry to worry about.
Because it's now additional geometry. And you'd have to find a space for it to exist. Which obviously if it's a small area of your model, you're probably fine. And in fact, if you're viewing this from up here, you know what? You can probably get away with that and just leave it as it is. But if it was somewhere in a game that you were walking along, let's turn on walk mode and turn on gravity. Oh, this is a tiny model. I'm on a toy.
Todd says, so that's what extrude manifold does. Well, it only took 85 minutes to get to it, but glad to see that.
Da-da! Yep. Well, that's not texturing. You tuned in today for texturing.
Yep.
Yeah, extruded.
Nice
the different manifold, the different extrusion options do have their uses, and that's what that one's for.
I'm going to start cutting Mikey off because I haven't eaten dinner yet and I'm hungry. And Mikey will go on all night if he can, because he enjoys this stuff, and which is good. That's why he teaches it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it doesn't look like we've got any other questions apart from that's what extrude manifold does, which is not technically a question. So well done,
awesome.
Mikey.
Thank you. Lots of fun this evening. I will put up another poll. Not like in the next week or so, but I will put up another poll so people get to vote on the next thing.
Rendering.
Yeah, it won't be texturing though. I think we've done quite a bit with texturing.
Take that off the poll.
Yeah, I will do. It'll be hand painted textures. But anyway, there's lots to cover, and if there is something that you guys want to see, then reach out. Come over to the Discord if you're not there already, and just say, "Hey, Mike, I want to see this next time," and I'll put it on the poll, and we'll see if we get there.
Yep.
Awesome.
All right. Lots of people saying thank you. Thank you for joining us, everybody. It was great to see you all here.
Yeah.
Thank you, Michael. That was I learned a lot. So, and thank you for Kat for not meowing all the way through it.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think that's it.
Yep. Thank you, everybody, and we'll see you next week where we'll be playing a game and taking it apart.
Yep. Bye.
See ya. Oh, I can't see.
Press it. Ow, my hand.